Religious conflict. Today we'll be studying the different religious conflicts, or some different religious conflicts throughout history. And the first one we'll discuss is the Jewish diaspora. So the diaspora occurred, this is a map of the Middle East, Europe, and Africa, and Northern Africa. And this is, the diaspora is just when the Jews of that time, right around 770 AD, the Middle East and Africa had been conquered by Rome. The Jewish people in this time rebelled against Rome, and in order to punish the people of that region, Rome exiled them from their homes. And so what this map illustrates is where you saw different settlements of Jews settling after they were exiled from Jerusalem. You'll see, in particular, this group of Jews went from the Middle East to Africa, made settlements in Africa, then crossed over from Africa and settled into Spain, up into Germany, and that's what you'll start seeing. You also see Jews went from Jerusalem to Greece, Rome, and you'll see that Jews went also, another primary group went to Turkey. The next event that we'll discuss, or the next religious conflict, will be the Crusades. For those of you who are familiar with Robin Hood and Knights of the Round Table and all those times in history, the Crusades occurred during this time. So that is a frame of reference for this time. And legend has it is that the Crusades occurred because the king during this time, the knights had been fighting one another in Europe. So the king got together and decided that instead of having the knights fight one another, we need to put them on a mission to take back the Holy Land, which was Jerusalem, which at this time had been controlled by Muslims. It had been controlled by Muslims for some time, but the new ruler of Jerusalem refused to allow Christians to come and worship, and that was used as an excuse to invade and to invade Jerusalem and to take back the Holy Land for Christians. And the Crusades, once again, were a series of wars that occurred between 1096 and 1270. So the Crusades were about 6 or 7 different wars that occurred during this time. 6 or 7 different invasions of Jerusalem that occurred during this time. And this just shows that during the time of Constantine, the Christians from Europe had gone on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. What a pilgrimage is just a way, it's just going back. It's just taking a religious trip back to the Holy Land at that time, the place where Jesus walked and lived and died in Jerusalem. The Christians do this still now today. Muslims do it. People of all faiths do it. They go, or the Abrahamic, religions go to the Holy Land. They go to the Holy Land to walk the place where their religions were formed, where Abraham walked, where Jesus walked, where David walked. So this is where the Christians have been doing this for some time. But by the 11th century, all of this changed because the number, and just as the number and frequency of religious pilgrimages to Jerusalem was going to its peak. At this time, the Turks, who had taken over Jerusalem, as I stated earlier, they prevented pilgrims from coming to Jerusalem. And what this map shows is just the Crusades. It shows where the Crusader kingdoms are in the east. This is Jerusalem. This is Europe. And all of these arrows represent the paths that the Christians took from Europe to Jerusalem to fight in the different Crusades. You see most of them, this is actually water. Some of them went by water. Some of them went by land, because Europe and the Middle East are connected by land, and this just shows the different battles of the Crusades. That brings us to the Protestant Reformation, and this is actually a picture of a monk named Martin Luther. Our Martin Luther, you guys think about Martin Luther King, he was named after Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a monk in the Catholic Church during this time, and during this time the Catholic Church was the most powerful organization in Europe. There were not all of these different denominations. There were not Lutherans or Anglicans or any of that, Baptists, anything like we have today. It was just the Catholic Church. And so Luther was a monk in the church. He was a holy person in the church, person of authority in the church. He was very unhappy with the practices that he saw occurring in the church, where people were basically selling blessings to rich people, and they were selling blessings. So Luther was unhappy with that, as well as other corruption. As a result of that, he taped what is called his 95 Theses, or 95 things that the Catholic Church can do, or the Catholic Church needs to do in order to reform and move closer to God. And so we have, which is, just going over it again, the Protestant Reformation is just a religious reform movement that began in the 16th century. And it was Protestant, and they call it Protestant because these people were protesting against the corruption that was found in the Catholic Church at this time. This is when we start to see the arrivals or the developings of new religions, different splinters of Christianity, different denominations of Christianity. Lutherans, Anglicans, Baptists, Presbyterians, Catholic, Calvinist churches started popping up. What this map shows you guys is Europe at this time, after the Protestant Reformation, or during the Protestant Reformation. You start seeing how Europe has been divided into the different religions. So Lutheranism is Germany and the Netherlands, and we'll get into Lutheranism in a moment. But you see a good bit of it is still this color. What is this, fuchsia? It's not fuchsia. Whatever this color is, this light purplish color that represents the Catholic Church. So what we basically will get into is that Luther was expelled from the church. He was called a heretic by the Holy Roman Emperor. He was, which means that he was sequestered. He was not given food. He was threatened that if he did not take back his statements regarding the church, that things would happen to him. As a result, Luther fled. He was given refuge in Germany. And so he went to Germany and became an outlaw. As a result of that, Germany's Prince of Orange took in Luther. We started seeing Luther splintered out and formed his own sect of Christianity, or his own denomination of Christianity called Lutheranism. And this eventually led to Germany's Civil War. And you'll see that part of Germany, with this map shows you that part of Germany is Lutheran, and the countries around it being Catholic, also part of Germany being Catholic. This led to a Germanic Civil War that took 26 years before it was settled. Now, the next religious conflict we'll spend time studying, something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, something that we all are very familiar with, which are the Pilgrims and the Puritans. This map represents the Pilgrims, or it represents the United States at that time, and what happens all right, so this mouse is acting a fool. Okay, so what this map represents is the United States at that time, and it shows us that the different colonies. We all know that the Pilgrims fled to New England. They wanted to flee from England to create a New England in the New World in 1620. To escape the persecution. Okay, so they ended up landing in Plymouth in the Massachusetts Bay. Well, I'm sorry, the Pilgrims ended up in Plymouth and Massachusetts, Massachusetts in 1630. The Puritans, they were seeking religious freedom from the Anglican Church. They ended up settling in Massachusetts Bay. So here is where the Pilgrims, and here were the Puritans. Two different groups of people, both seeking religious freedom. And what they wanted to do was build a model community that would show Christians around the world of an example to follow of a model community. And this is what we think of when we see the traditional Puritans or Pilgrims. This is an example of it. That brings us to the Spanish Inquisition, which is the next religious conflict that we'll discuss. Began around 1478. And it started as a result of, if you guys think about go back to thinking about the diaspora, I showed you that there were Jewish settlements that were in Spain at this time. We had a Jewish community in Spain. We also had a large Muslim community in Spain, because by that time Spain had been conquered by Muslims from Africa, and but Spanish they had been eventually driven out of Spain. But you still had a sizable Muslim community in Spain. So what we see is that it targeted, basically, the Inquisition was just the Inquisition means like persecution or harassing or torturing. And what we saw is that it basically targeted people who were converted to Christianity from Judaism in Spain. It was Judaism and Islam. So from Jews and Islam who had Jews and Muslims who converted to Christianity at that time, who converted to Catholicism. People in the Catholic Church in Spain at that time did not believe them. They thought that these people were trying to infiltrate the Catholic Church. There were some people that thought they were trying to infiltrate the Catholic Church and were secretly abiding by their old religion. So what was happening is these people were oftentimes, if you were accused of still practicing your old religion and being a Catholic, which of course they forced you to be a Catholic, but if after being forced to become a Catholic you were accused of still practicing your old religion, you would be interrogated, you could be tortured, your family could be tortured. So this is what, and as a result of this was basically the Spanish Inquisition. Now, first they just targeted people who were Muslims and Jews, and ended up targeted Muslims and Jews, but it then soon expanded to targeting anybody who is not Catholic, any Protestants who are not Catholic. All right, the end. Make sure you fill out your notes guide, highlight what you need to. See you in class. Have a good evening.